speaking of perseverance, I was thinking about what you can do to make a satisfying puzzle for your DMing, and your campaigns and stuff. And I feel like it's a loaded term, because satisfying puzzle, what does that mean? Does it mean it's a hard puzzle, or does it mean that once you finally, get it, that it's like, that you just get that wave of relief washing over you, like, I finally understand, it finally makes sense, and I feel that my action steps are rewarded. How do you present a good puzzle to the players so that it's not impossible to solve, but it feels challenging? That's what I'm looking for, as more like a skill as a DM to learn today.
Yeah, I find that, so my first point was the logical through line, that when you find the conclusion, you can then count back and see how it can, now having more information, or with the conclusion in hand, how it would get there. This is also the Sierra problem for all the King's Quest games, and some of the Space Quest games. You have a lot of puzzles in those point-and-click adventures where you have to take certain items and then put them in play in certain ways to solve different puzzles and different problems. And there's always one or two, at least, in each of the games that you're like, what? Where you have like a block of cheese, and the block of cheese is the thing that stops the great wizard from doing the thing. And you go, I held on to that cheese from the beginning of the game, and there's no logical reason why it would affect this outcome in this way, and yet it works. That's more of a joke by the creators, but it's always like, what? And puzzles like that, I don't think would really exist in a D&D game, unless that's the type of setting that you're sort of making fun of and you've all agreed to. But I think it needs to have a logical through line. Once you have the conclusion, that it makes sense going backwards. So when you when you construct a puzzle, you start with the solution in mind, and then go backwards and try to muddy the waters without being overtly obtuse or really, really confusing. Because it's okay to have distractors in a puzzle, but when you find the solution, it needs to be clear, even if it wasn't obvious.
Yeah. I just looked up the definition of a puzzle. Because, we just talked about combat is really one of the ultimate puzzles in the Dungeons and Dragons experience. It's the most structured pillar of, there are very finite rules on what you can do in combat, as opposed to exploration or social interaction. The definition of a puzzle that I found in terms of what we're talking about is a game, toy, or problem designed to test ingenuity or knowledge. And knowledge is the key part of that, where I find that the most rewarding puzzles of D&D are the ones that where the knowledge is up front, and that you have to figure it out, but there's nothing like super hidden, because those are all the puzzles that I've been frustrated with. I'm gonna be perfectly honest, the World Engine puzzle was one that I was like, ow, and I felt like I didn't have, and when we finally had the solution, it was like, could we have done anything about it? So like it ended up being like one of the spirits in Akra's like soul or whatever that she had collected was like an answer, but the NPC had to tell us it was an answer, and then the NPC solved it. So like it was one of those things where it was like
that was entirely my problem.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought was interesting was my friend Tim said this, where he hates puzzles in D&D like exploration, because puzzles are always a result of player ingenuity and knowledge, not character ingenuity and knowledge. So if you have a smart player and they're playing a barbarian with an intelligence score of 6, so they have a -2 to their intelligence, but they're like a player that has a lot of ingenuity, and another player who might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but they're role-playing a very intelligent wizard or artificer, the barbarian may figure out the puzzle first, even though story-wise it makes sense for the intelligence-based character to do it. So, and this is where, to your credit, Adam, some of the stuff I've really liked with some of the puzzles we've solved recently is you're giving, and because we were playing on Roll20 and there's a whisper function, you whisper the more hidden information to the characters that tend to have a better intelligence or wisdom score, so that they start with the information, and then if they're stumped, they can then dispense that information freely and then work as part of a team in order to solve it. There's also kind of a video game approach to it as well, where, you know, you present the clues, the players have no clue, so you either have an NPC or a loading screen like give like a hint to it, like, hey, by the way, if you turn the lever to the right, so like, or you notice that this indent on a wall has an outline, so like you give them hints of things to kind of solve it.
They've had moments where they do like an investigation check, and it's that general, I look at things, and in that investigation check, I'll say, oh, you notice that this is this handle on the wall, and there seems to be resistance to the left, and it seems to give a little to the right.
Yeah.
I turn it to the right, and then something happens.
The other difference is, this is where I would love to use passive investigation and passive perception scores, because remember, if it's an investigation check, it has the possibility to fail, and then it really, what those usually resolve at is, I got a nat 1, somebody else try, you got a nat 20, and like you end up just rolling until you get it. So like, why not just give it to them right away, unless there's some kind of time thing. Like Tomb of Annihilation had a very unfair puzzle at the beginning, which was you have 6 seconds to figure out the puzzle, and I'm counting down from 6. So your player, if you want to try to solve it, can make an investigation check to see if they can score within those 6 seconds. Other than that, guess who's getting lit on fire, you know? Designing competent puzzles in D&D really is an art form. And the other hard part is if you create too many hidden punishments, it discourages the players from wanting to actually do it.
Absolutely. And you know, that kind of reminds me of this idea. There's this theory about when you're developing skills, this idea of flow, or the flow mindset. I mean, it seems pretty reasonable. It's kind of hard for me to like say that, you know, you could test it scientifically because you can't really calculate this kind of thing. The idea is that you grow in skill when you face a challenge that is about 4% higher than what your skill level is, because it forces you to grow. And that is supposed to lead to an exponential growth curve or something like that, where if you just keep taking these like 4%, you know, bigger bites than you normally would, then you're going to exponentially go from 4% to 16% better from where you were to, I think, 64% or something like that. And it's just interesting because I think you could kind of apply that to this, where you say you have a challenge and you know your players. You know what you want out of the puzzle. So how are you going to make it so that it feels like a challenge to them, but is not like overbearing where they just give up? So I think 4%, maybe, I don't like, if you can quantify that kind of thing, 4% more than what they have displayed maybe so far in ingenuity or something will allow for that kind of satisfaction out of the puzzle.
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.